Hi, Luli and Annie. I'm gonna share my screen. Okay, today we are gonna talk about lesson 3, ecosystems. And this is something that we have talked about before in different ways, so it's gonna be really easy to understand. For the vocabulary today, we have the word consumers. Consumers, it's someone or something that uses up or destroys things. They eat them usually. Decomposers, a tiny organism that eats the dead remains of former living things. Ecosystem, the complex level of organization within nature consisting of both the physical and the biological environment. So it means how do like non-living things and living things work together and they become a system. Producers, like green plants that grow and are partly or fully eaten by other animals. Okay. So the physical environment consists of non-living things like water, soil, air, the weather, nutrients, and energy. And the biological environment consists of all living things. So God planned for all of those physical and biological environment to depend on one another. And it makes sense, right? How much water, how much soil, air, weather, all of that affects the type of animals and plants that you have in a place. Um, Let me see. There's a scientist called an ecologist that studies ecology, so the study of living things, and the environment, and they try to understand how all of these activities interact with nature. An ecosystem, it's a complex level of organization within nature. Why? Because you have different plants and animals living together. And to better understand an ecosystem, what ecologists did is they gave names to various things that make up the ecosystem. And they also study food change, which we have talked about before, and the way energy and food move through the ecosystem. So we're gonna talk about that. And we have mentioned it before, but remember producers? Producers are green plants, for example, grass and trees. What happens with producers? Green plants use the energy from the sun. They use carbon dioxide from the air and chemicals from the soil to produce food, meaning they undergo photosynthesis. They are the main living things that produce food. Animals, fungi, and some other plants that are not green can't make their own food. They receive their food from green plants. And then we have consumers. Remember, consumers are animals that eat producers. They must get their food from green plants. And there are two types of consumers, primary consumers and secondary consumers. Primary consumers are plant eaters or herbivores. They get their food directly by eating the plant. They digest the plant and then they receive the energy. And you have some examples, sheep, cows, mouse, grasshoppers, and rabbits. And also birds if they're eating seeds. And then you have secondary consumers that are animals that eat other animals that did eat the plant for food. So they ate the primary consumers. This way, the secondary consumer gets the food and energy they need from the primary consumers who ate the plants. And examples for that, foxes, dogs, wolves, lions, and also birds if what they're eating is insects. You see, a bird can eat both. And then we have the decomposers. Decomposers are bacteria and fungi, for example, and they feed on the waste products, meaning poo, or the dead bodies of plants or animals, anything that is rotten or dead. And these organisms are an important part of the chemical cycle. Remember that they are like the cleanup team of nature. They break down the food stored in waste or dead things and then put the chemicals back into the soil. And these chemicals and these nutrients can then be used again by the producers, the green plants, and the cycle continues again. That's the chemical cycle. And then we have food chains. And we talked about this before. Remember that you have your producer, your green plant, then your primary consumer, which would be a herbivore or plant eater. A secondary consumer would be a meat eater or carnivore. And then you have a decomposer that decomposes the animals. So the series of stages that energy goes through in the form of food is called a food chain. Some food chains are long and complex, and others are short and simple. The kind of food chain that exists depends upon the particular ecosystem where the organisms live. So climate and land affect the food chain. And many food chains can exist in a particular type of ecosystem. For example, you can have a food chain involving a robin. A robin is a type of bird. And then you can have another food chain involving a deer, all in the same space. And they are not part of each other's food chain. And the balance of nature depends on the food chains. An example is that if a secondary consumer is removed from the food chain, imagine that we have wolves, okay? And wolves are eating rabbits and rabbits are eating plants. Just an example, okay? What happens if we kill all of the wolves or if we take them away? Then nobody's eating the rabbits and we're gonna have a lot of rabbits. And all of those rabbits are gonna eat all of the grass, and then they're not gonna leave any more grass for other animal that also depends on that grass. And for example, let's imagine what else. Imagine there's a sheep, and the sheep also eats the grass that the rabbits are eating. If the rabbits eat all of the grass, then the sheep may die, or the animal that eats the sheep may die, and the balance of nature would be upset. And then we have food webs. Food webs mean that it's like food chains but relating in between each other, because most ecosystems have a great variety of producers, consumers, and decomposers, and they overlap, meaning that like one of them can be in more than one food chain. Usually, a primary consumer eats a variety of producer plants. They just only eat once. They can eat 2 or 3 types. And then secondary consumers usually prey on different kinds of primary consumer animals. For example, a fox can eat a mouse, but it can also, I don't know, eat a rabbit. You get the idea? So they can eat more than one thing, and that affects many food chains. So food webs are like food chains but connected. And yeah, and also one thing to mention is that some animals, like birds, eat both plants and animal. So they can be primary consumers and secondary consumers at the same time. Okay, girl, that would be it. Have a good day. And if you have any questions, just make sure to ask.